Before we dive in, a quick shout out to Thrizer. More on them later, but trust me, you'll want to hear this episode.
Welcome to Bossing Up, Overcoming OCD, the podcast designed to help you take control of your life and boss up to OCD. I'm your host, Erin Davis, OCD therapist and relationship coach. I'm also a wife, mom to 3, and dog mama. If you're overwhelmed by thoughts that aren't getting cured in typical talk therapy, it's time to climb out of that valley and enjoy the view. Grab your coffee, pop in your AirPods, and join me as we explore proven strategies, personal stories, and expert advice to help you boss up and thrive beyond OCD. Hello, Bossing Up, Overcoming OCD listeners. I have another special guest with me today. Cannot wait to introduce you to my friend and cherished confidant, Dr. Nat Green. Join us for an eye-opening conversation with Dr. Nat, who is a leading voice in trauma recovery and post-traumatic growth. In this episode, you're going to discover insights on trauma cycles, the importance of the nervous system, and the innovative methods she uses to help people break free from their trauma. You're going to learn about her groundbreaking concepts like her trauma archetypes, and you'll have access to her free quiz to discover your own trauma archetype. Whether you're dealing with trauma, OCD, or just looking for mental health improvements, this episode promises valuable tips and a fascinating new perspective on healing. Before we jump into the show, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Thrizer transforms the way clients interact with their out-of-network benefits. As you know, clients need to manually submit super bills for their out-of-network sessions and wait months for reimbursement. With Thrizer, clients can just pay a copay for sessions, while Thrizer covers the rest of your full rate up front. They handle everything from verifying out-of-network benefits, submitting claims, to waiting for reimbursement on the client's behalf. In turn, they are an incredibly powerful tool for you and your practice to convert and retain private pay clients. You can try Thrizer completely for free with my link, or go to join.thrizer.com/Erin. Okay, let's jump into the conversation. Well, welcome to this special episode of Bossing Up, Overcoming OCD. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Nat Green. She is a psychologist out in Australia, and she is the leading voice in trauma recovery and post-traumatic growth. She's a best-selling author and creator of the Trauma Archetypes of Transformation and an ABS method. So we're going to be learning all about these things and all about Dr. Nat. I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Nat and sharing the same space with her for a couple of months now, and she really brings a lot of knowledge and compassion and insights. But I do want to let you guys know about her books are called Key to Freedom, The 7-Step Model to Triumph Over Trauma and Break Your Trauma Cycle, The 7 Archetypes of Transformation. She's also the host of her podcast called Growing Tall Poppies, which has inspired thousands to reclaim their lives and find joy, freedom, and purpose after adversity. So thank you so much, Dr. Nat, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin. I've been so looking forward to catching up with you again and being able to talk about trauma, because, you know, I do like to chat about trauma quite a bit, and hopefully give a lot of tips and value to your listeners who might be also struggling with trauma that might have triggered some of their OCD.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, as I was talking about before we came on the air, like, I feel like so many people are impacted by trauma, whether they realize it or not. And I think a lot of listeners come to my show wondering, like, do I have OCD? You know, so I love that we're bringing this special episode because one way or another, we're all impacted. And, you know, there's probably some stuff coming out now about the COVID pandemic. Like, that was a trauma for everyone.
Absolutely. And I think, I think those stats, we know nothing yet about the impact really, particularly on adolescents or kids that are now becoming adolescents, or the people who were in the latter part of their schooling, and the amount of anxiety that's now showing up.
Yes.
Children and adolescents because of the COVID pandemic and the isolation and, the anxiety attached to not being able to leave your house.
Yes.
And it was very similar over there. I know over here there were some states in Australia where you were not allowed to leave your house.
Yes, I know. And with the fear of there being this deathly virus out there, and it was legitimate, like it wasn't even hypothetical. So I think we can all agree we've been impacted by trauma to some extent. And so I'm very curious to kind of get into your expertise and your insights as we talk about trauma. And I'd love to hear your perspective about the nervous system as well. So in getting started, like you've been working in trauma for many, many years. And in your books and in your podcast, you talk about what happens when you're stuck in a trauma cycle. I love that because for the overthinkers in the OCD world, they get stuck in cycles of overthinking. So can you tell me and tell us more about the trauma cycle and what that looks like?
Yeah, great question. Anyone who was alive during the pandemic has experienced such significant fear, worry, anxiety, and ultimately trauma because of the level of uncertainty around what was happening at the time. So that in itself is this widespread level of our nervous systems being on constant alert and us being unsure about should we go, should we do this, should we do that, we need to do what we're told. And then a lot of people who weren't able to do that. They just said, no, I don't agree to that. I don't like being controlled. So again, all of this is based around our experiences that we've had in our life. If you've grown up with significant childhood trauma and abuse, then there's going to be a deeper level of the trauma being stuck in your nervous system. When trauma happens, even though we may think, yep, we're okay, we've moved through it, we've processed it, we've moved on, what we know is that trauma, whether it's resolved or unresolved, gets stuck in our nervous system. And there's a fantastic book written by Bessel van der Kolk, who's an expert, in the trauma field. So it's a brilliant book, isn't it, about the body keeps the score. Yes. Absolutely spot on. Knowing, however, that I've been working in the trauma field for 35 years. So I'm showing my age there.
That's incredible.
Thank you. And 35 years ago, we didn't know any of this stuff. When I was learning how to do trauma therapy, it was all around talking, continuing to talk about it, write down what happened, and do what we call exposure therapy. So we go over and over and over what happened.
Yes, that was the beginning. I mean, I remember that type of training also. But, I do exposure work, but in a different sense. So, yeah, I've seen how exposure work can be done with trauma. And they called it prolonged exposure in my training.
Absolutely. Yeah. So prolonged exposure therapy, and it's the stock standard treatment for OCD and also for trauma for many years. And what we know, though, is when we talk about being stuck in a trauma cycle, we're referring to patterns that keep repeating in our lives, often without us realizing it.
Okay, so that's the trauma cycle. Like we're doing things as a reaction out of trauma and not even realizing it.
Correct. So the trauma is unprocessed. It's stuck in our nervous system, and our body will be in that fight or flight mode constantly on alert, hypervigilant. It starts to get confused about what is something that's really going to hurt us and harm us and what's not.
Like what's a real threat versus this perceived threat.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's that feeling of being stuck almost in the same emotional reactions, the same struggles, the same self-doubt, no matter how much time has passed or how much we try to move on. So the same things we keep repeating, like the same response when something happens, because our body is coming from a place of, I felt that feeling before when I was in my trauma. And I felt a little bit like this. So it's triggered and it continues to go over and over, and we keep doing the same thing. And that's that cycle.
Absolutely. Because, I could see where someone gets maybe consciously or subconsciously, they feel like they're back in that trauma, that flashback. And so they're starting to react and they're dysregulated. It was fascinating to me when I had my first flashback. I was like 32 when I had my first flashback. And I was like, what is this? And I even went and asked someone, what is this? And they're like, Erin, it's a flashback. So it's, everyone's experience is different. And what was helpful to me was knowing that that's what it was and that there can be support for that. And so, Dr. Nat, for someone who's listening right now and they feel stuck in a trauma cycle or they feel overwhelmed by their trauma, what is like that first step they can take towards feeling better or healing or having some growth? I know what my story looked like, but I'm curious, what is your experience and how do you work with that?
Okay, so I'll start with some common signs so that anyone who's listening can sort of go, oh, no, that's not me. Oh, yes, that is me. So some common signs that you might be stuck in a trauma cycle would include feeling emotionally numb. So things happen, but you just sort of disconnect. You don't really feel things. You feel disconnected from life, as if life's just passing you by and you're not really engaged in it. Constant overthinking or replaying past events. Now, we know that would be a very common one with people with OCD, going over and over it. There's also struggling with guilt, shame or self-blame. So some of those really negative emotions and not knowing how to get out of that. If you're feeling easily triggered, anxious or on edge. And often another sign might be self-sabotaging patterns in relationships, in work or in self-care.
Okay. So those are the signs that they might be stuck or experiencing this trauma cycle.
So because, and I was experienced in treating trauma, and then I had my own significant trauma experience. It was really bizarre from where I sat to suddenly be on the other side of the couch, being able to help people in what I thought was a really effective way. And suddenly I was experiencing a really deep level of my own trauma, and I thought, oh, this talk therapy isn't quite enough. So that's where I really started to explore what else might need to change for us to start to break that trauma cycle.
So you had your own traumatic experience and then you started to, see from the other side that just the talking wasn't enough. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So what do you think those steps are to truly or to better help? Because I think some people honestly can do okay with just the talk therapy. And that's fine. You know, everyone's brain is different. Everyone's trauma experience is different. We can't compare, so whatever works for you. So what would you say is like the best first step towards the healing and the growth?
If you start to recognize that any of that is happening for you and you're stuck in that trauma cycle, then there's probably this idea that it's not just stored in your mind, so talk therapy isn't going to be enough. It will make a huge difference, as you just said, for people. They go along for therapy, to see a psychologist, a counsellor, and they can make really good progress. If you're stuck in that cycle, then there's a sign that it's not just in your mind, but in your body and your nervous system.
I like this idea of exploring your values and what's important to you, because that's helping you get introduced to the new version of you. Or what do you call it? Is that part of your post-traumatic growth process?
Yeah, it is. So because of what I'd been through as well as my years of experience, I thought something has to change. There has to be another way to approach it that is more holistic, in that we look at the mind and the body connection. And we know that in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a lot more work around polyvagal theory and
love it. Yes.
really looking at us more as a holistic version of a person rather than just dealing with what's in the mind. My method really started to look at was, well, okay, let's get clear on, because of what you've been through, things feel different for you. Who you are is not the same as who you used to be, and that can be totally okay. So coming to terms with what's important to you now, because trauma puts things in perspective.
Oh, yeah. Like safety,
Absolutely.
honesty. And, I think about just being a mom now. I'm like, I'm going to be in the know about things with my kids, and just, it changes you for sure.
Absolutely. So when you start to realize that you don't have to go back to who you were, there's parts of you and components of you that have grown because of what you've been through, and you can embrace that, you can start to go, oh, okay, who am I now? And start to build on your core identity and get really clear on if relationships with people weren't serving you in the past, you have a new sense of what's important, what really matters, and you can let go of the relationships that weren't healthy, that were toxic, and you almost get this newfound sense of urgency and a sense of purpose that this is what I'm doing, this is why I'm here, and I can let go of the things that aren't healthy and aren't helpful. And then the other component that I found was really, really important was looking at the work that was done by Grant Susalu and Marvin Oka, which is around the three brains. More and more obvious in the last 5 to 10 years, where we've been doing more and more research with neuroscience and the nervous system, is that we have the three brains: the head, the heart, and the gut.
Totally agree. There is so much coming out about gut health now, and I've been on that train for probably 5 years now. Yes, because gut health is so important.
And when we go through trauma, we automatically, because of what's happened and our need to protect ourselves and feel safe, what happens is one of those brains, and often two of those brains, disconnect. For someone who is stuck in a trauma loop and trauma cycle, they will be going over and over and over things, particularly the OCD, the thoughts will be going over and over and over, and they can't break that loop. They can't get out of their head. Right?
Yes.
With that a lot. And that often they have experienced a disconnect because it's too painful with the emotions. So the heart brain shuts it down so that they don't feel. They just think and think and think and think and think because it's too painful to feel. Or they're still connected, and their head and their heart are constantly making them more anxious, more stressed, overthinking, and they've disconnected from that sense of safety around the gut. And that gut brain is where we get a sense of identity, who we are, and that gut feeling of our inner wisdom and our inner knowledge and our inner knowing.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I was seeing this disconnect and thinking, well, we need to really work on reconnecting that. So I focused on the values and identity, started to see huge shifts with that, then looked at, okay, if we could release the emotions that are keeping us stuck, keeping us tethered to our past experiences, our past thoughts, feelings, things that had happened that we thought we dealt with years ago through our years of therapy, but were still stuck in our body and keeping us in that loop, then we might be able to really look at regulating our nervous system.
Okay. Yeah. So speaking of the nervous system, can you explain more about like the polyvagal theory or how like trauma impacts the nervous system? I mean, with those highs and lows or, you know, getting to that window of tolerance, is that something that you talk about with your clients?
Probably. I mean, I've already touched on the sort of things that would show you that you're stuck in it, in that trauma loop, because it's stuck in your nervous system. I think it's more around if you're constantly hypervigilant, hyper alert and reactive. And then I can go through the TRE, a way to induce the tremoring to release the nervous system.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So speaking of the nervous system, Dr. Nat, like what are the techniques or the strategies to help someone like their trauma is very much showing up in their nervous system and the person is feeling anxious all the time or super like hypervigilant? Yeah. What are your techniques around that?
Okay. And there's a number of different ways. Like we have various ways that we can calm our nervous system through breathing. We can do box breathing.
Box breathing. Do you do any tapping exercises?
No, I don't. I'm not an EFT practitioner. I tend to do what we call TRE, which is trauma and tension release exercises. So
interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process. I'll give you an example. So when you go through something traumatic, say giving birth, we know that you give birth to your child, what often happens is your body goes into shock and tremors, doesn't it? Or if you have a car accident and you might be shaking or you get even just a fright. Yeah, and what's the first thing that people tend to do is get a blanket and wrap it around you to warm you up and stop you shaking. What we know is that the body has its own amazing internal wisdom, and that is actually a way that it releases the trauma and processes what has happened to it. If you've ever gone through surgery, have you ever had surgery before?
Yes. Yes, I had my appendix removed, so I have had surgery.
So when you wake up, you often will be tremoring because your body's recovering, coming out, in recovery, and they'll give you warm blankets. And that is really to stop your body tremoring. But what we know is it's your body's way of releasing what's happened and the shock. So when a body goes through trauma, it goes into shock. So instead of trying to stop that shaking, we actually need to do is allow the shaking, because that's the body's way of regulating our nervous system.
Really fascinating, because, when we talk about trauma, like I was reading a book one time and it was talking about how someone almost got hit by a bus. And so they were going through all this trauma stuff and like not wanting to go back to the bus stop. But then it was comparing it to that fight or flight response of animals, and how animals, they will essentially shake it off.
Absolutely. And that's what I do.
Yeah, like animals, their life is constantly in danger. And I get it, but like for us humans, whenever something traumatic happens, it can get stuck, and it can get stuck in our nervous system. But I thought it was very fascinating how it's like the animals will literally shake and
move on.
Then they move on.
Yeah. And so you see that even, if you're watching movies or documentaries about animals out in the wild in Africa, you'll see, the antelope at the watering hole, and one of its predators comes up, and you see it sort of realise, have a bit of a shake and run away and move on. And that's exactly that. So when I'm running TRE sessions with my clients, I will tell them about, the dog that gets up, shakes it off if it's a bit scared or frightened of a bigger dog or a bigger animal, shakes it off and runs off. And that's exactly what the TRE process does. Be certified to train someone in it. There is a free TRE course, and I can give you the links to a free TRE course that some of your listeners might be really interested in, just to see a little bit about what it is and try it themselves, if that would be helpful.
Okay, really cool. Yeah, because I've always thought, these emotions, we need to find a way to release them. Any of them. Got to release them, because if they stay trapped in the body, I think that's where a lot of panic attacks come from, because we haven't effectively released these emotions. So really cool how the whole system around processing the shakes and letting it out. All right. So
you can do it by leaning with your back up against a wall and sort of getting into a bit of a squat until your legs start to tremor, and then your body lets it out, and you just stay there, and you can loosen up your whole body and let it out. And you can do it lying down on a mat and put your legs at a certain angle to evoke the tremors. And once you work with someone, you can loosen up any areas where it looks like their body may be bracing or stuck, which is often,
oh my gosh.
I know, it's amazing.
Wow.
I've
I think
never
that
seen
would
anything
be
like it. I was
in my
fascinated.
shoulders, in my neck. Like somehow if I can figure that out.
Yeah. So what you can do is learn how to loosen that up and focus on those areas and release them, and it lets out the tension, and it also regulates your nervous system so you feel calmer overall. And when you practice it, something that to start with you would only do 2 to 3 times a week. You might do 10 minutes a day, and you can build up, but you can do it lying in bed before you go to sleep and just sort of shake it off and shake off what's happened in the day. It's amazing. It really is fantastic.
Wow. Yeah. All right. So as we're coming to a close, I know that, with your books, you talk about the trauma archetypes. Did you want to give a brief overview of what those trauma archetypes are and how people, can move from trauma into post-traumatic growth with these trauma archetypes in mind?
Absolutely. So I started to see from all the years of working with people with trauma that there were these really clear characteristics and things that I was noticing for the people that went through trauma, came out the other side, and were able to get to a point of thriving. So I looked at getting key components of these and calling them archetypes. And I've developed up 7 archetypes. So there's the Phoenix Riser.
Oh.
That's someone who's been through trauma, ready to rebuild. They've still got self-doubt and a fear of stepping into themselves, their new self. The Authentic Warrior. So that is someone who's spent years of suppressing their true emotions and putting on a strong front. Often be what we might see of a lot of people with OCD. And the healing for them will come when they allow themselves to be vulnerable and really connect with their authentic self. There's the Resilient Sage.
Wow.
This is one of my favorites. This is someone who's intellectualized their trauma and struggles to feel. So there's that disconnect between the head and the heart brain.
Got it.
So, but they've also gained lots of wisdom from their experiences and internalized it. So for them, it's about learning to integrate their mind and body fully. It's the Empowered Trailblazer. So this person has a really deep inner drive to turn their pain into purpose.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That might be me.
Trailblazer.
Yes,
You're
no
a
one is
trailblazer
stopping
for
me.
sure. And that's where I stand. That's my main archetype is the Empowered Trailblazer. And growth for you will happen when you learn to balance your mission with self-care and vulnerability.
Oh boy. That's a continual struggle. That self-care part. Oh my goodness. It's hard to turn off the trailblazing side. But
Absolutely. So even just saying that, you can go, oh, yeah, I can relate. So it's amazing how quickly people can connect to these archetypes. So we are the reflective orchestrator. So they're masters of analysing and making sense of their experiences and highly introspective. And of course, that can lead to overthinking, self-doubt, and where a lot of OCD can come in. And the breakthrough for a reflective orchestrator comes when they learn to trust their instincts, which again is that connecting the head, the heart, and the gut brain.
wow. Yeah. I definitely know a lot of clients who are probably in that category.
Yeah.
Just learning to trust themselves. Yeah. Go ahead.
And it's easy for us to stop trusting ourselves because bad things have happened or we've made poor choices or things haven't worked out the way we wanted. All that, because we're stuck in that trauma loop, can give us that feedback. But there's always the opposite side of that, isn't there? Once we know how to tap into that, we can act. So then there's the Radiant Alchemist, and these people turn their pain into wisdom using creativity, spirituality, or just an alternative way that they choose to navigate their life by grounding themselves in the present, and they can embody through their creativity how to move forward. And the last one is the Liberated Voyager, and they're the ones that often won't stay in the one spot. They continue to seek adventure. They continue to want to move away, but often that can be running away from what's happened.
And you've got a trauma archetypes quiz, right?
I do. So
Awesome.
there's a quiz. So I'll give you the link to that you can give your listeners, and you can go on there.
Absolutely.
To 10 minutes, and it's fascinating. And then you can find out more about what your archetype is, because when you can tap into the strengths that are already there, tap into that wisdom, and then address the challenges that archetype will face, you can accelerate your healing and move into post-traumatic growth so much quicker. You do not have to stay stuck in a trauma cycle and have years and years of trauma therapy.
Right. Oh my goodness. Love it. I'm all about efficiency and of course doing what works. I love this trauma archetypes like perspective. It's something that's not out there. Like this is so unique.
It is.
Wow.
I love it. When I was seeing all these patterns and recognizing that, I thought, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. It was exciting for me. And then I've put it out in the world and people are giving me feedback around, it was like you were in my head. Oh my goodness, you knew exactly what I'd been doing and why I'd been doing it. So I think nothing is better than knowing ourselves at the deepest, darkest level. So then we can move forward and we can challenge the bits where we're stuck. And then by knowing ourselves the best way we possibly can, and then learning how to release that from our nervous system, fully embrace it, we can grow and we can be like that phoenix that rises from the ashes and rebuilds and thrives.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for being here. And where can the listeners connect with you, Dr. Nat?
Thank you so much again for having me, Erin. It's been such a delight chatting with you. I'm on Facebook, just under Dr. Natalie Green. I am on Instagram, Dr. Nat Green, and you can find me. My website is nataliegreen.com.au, AU for Australia. So
Okay.
your listeners will go, oh, AU, yes, so .com.au.
Yes. And then your Growing Tall Poppies podcast.
Oh, yes. So that's available on podcast platforms, and they'll hear a wonderful episode where you shared your wisdom and the listeners have been loving the episode you so generously shared too. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I'm so glad, and I'm glad I could speak with you here and learn more about the trauma growth concepts and the trauma archetypes. Love the quiz idea. I'm probably going to take the quiz too, because I just want to get that confirmation that I'm the trailblazer. I just see that that's what it's going to be. But yeah, thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.